Okay, hello everyone. We are live on Facebook, the 3 Million Facebook page, as well as here on Zoom. We're just waiting a few minutes whilst people are joining. Welcome to the London Voices report launch. It's a really exciting day that marks the end, hopefully not the final end, but the end of a 9 months project, the first full report, executive summary, and some insights from researchers, funders, and people with lived experience here on the webinar today. I'm Alexandra Bulat. I'm the co-manager of the Young Europeans Network at the 3 Million. The Young Europeans Network was the delivery partner for this project, this London Voices research project. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes until more people join. So I see more people joining on Facebook as well as here on Zoom. Welcome everyone, and then we'll make a start. Before we make a start with explaining a bit more about the project and hearing the presentations from the research team and the responses to the research, I would just like to do a little bit, just a couple of points about housekeeping on Zoom. So you have, if you are following this on Zoom, you have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if during the presentations you have any questions or even had any questions before, feel free to put them on the Q&A chat. It will be much easier for us to see the questions in the Q&A part of the webinar and then make sure that we answer as many questions as possible. So feel free to put questions for the research team and of course also for the people who will speak from a lived experience perspective as well later in the webinar. If you're following this on Facebook, you have a comment option. So if you have again a question, add a comment and I'll be able to see the comments in the Q&A part. So we can include some comments and questions from Facebook as well. You also have a chat, so if you want to share any kind of resources, there'll be some links to the report and the briefing paper and the executive summary in the chat by the end of the this webinar. But again, you can use the chat for just commenting about the research, but to put the questions in the Q&A. A few words about the Young Europeans Network for those who don't know us. We were the delivery partner for this London Voices project, and we're the youth wing of the 3 Million, an organization that works with EU citizens in the UK. But we also do a lot of research projects, including contributing to university research projects in the past, and also projects in the third sector. I was really excited when I saw this project being launched, because one of the main issues that the 3 Million Young Europeans Network is working on is actually democratic participation of one of the underrepresented groups in the UK, which is EU migrants, EU citizens. So we had various projects around voter registration, around participation, political education, and other areas. So I was really excited that we could actually have this project to look at underrepresentation in a wider context and look at all the groups involved and have so many insightful conversations with many representatives of underrepresented groups in London. The structure of the day, we have a bit of a program of the day. For those of you joining, we have a presentation of the survey findings, so the kind of quantitative part of the research, then some of the qualitative insight, a bit of a very top level summary of the recommendations, and you'll find all this detail in the report and the documents that we'll share with you. And then we really wanted to focus today on hearing directly some responses from some of the people with lived experience of the issues that we're speaking about in the report. So I'm really glad to have representatives from young Londoners, from migrant and minority ethnic Londoners, from various groups, including private renters, as also I'll introduce them all in turn when we get to that point. So that's really exciting part of the webinar. You get to hear directly from the people involved, and then we have some reflections from funders and the Greater London Authority as well. So again, I will introduce all the speakers as we go. Finally, we'll have a Q&A session about the last 15 minutes or so at the end of the webinar, and then we'll wrap up and have the next steps or any kind of ideas for next steps. So this research, the London Voices research, was funded by the Trust for London on behalf of the Citizenship and Integration initiative, and also the UK Democracy Fund, which is a Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust initiative. So a big thank you to the funders, and also a big thank you to Dr. Elizabeth Pope from the Greater London Authority, who supported us throughout the project as well. And we'll hear from funders and the GLA in the webinar. So I still see some people joining. So what I will do now is I will share our like 1 minute launch video, and then we'll just jump into the presentation of the report. So I hope technology is on my side, and we'll try to share this video, which is done by Londoners. So let me know in the chat if you can't hear it, but fingers crossed.
It's about having the accessible information, the resources, the rights and representation in London society and democracy.
It's about volunteering, joining a movement or a protest, registering to vote, and setting up a community event or a campaign we care about.
It's about institutions valuing every Londoner and our charities and organisations, providing the space and support for our voices to be heard.
This is our journey to equal, accessible, representative, full participation. Join us.
All right, that's a short video to start with and to really show the diversity of people and voices involved in our project. So now moving on to my next screen, which are the slides and the research presentation. So I would like to, just 1 second, sorry about this. It's still the video. Here we go, the slides of the presentation. First, before we start the research presentation, I would like to thank all the research team. So we had a wonderful research team, a very diverse research team, people who lived experiences of various kinds in London. So Omar, Katharina, Isabel, Raluca, and Stephanie, a very big thank you for being so involved throughout the last 9 months in the project and working so hard on this research. So I'm really glad that now we're at the point to be able to present those findings of the research. So I would like first to introduce Omar, who will present the quantitative section of this report. Over to you, Omar.
All right, thank you so much, Alex. So what I will do very briefly today is introduce you to the results of the survey that we conducted as part of this project. And Katerina Laval and I were the main researchers responsible for this part of the report. Next slide, please. So over the summer, we managed to reach around 109 civil society organizations from across London that represent roughly 4,000 full-time employees and 5,600 volunteers who reach among themselves around 380,000 beneficiaries across London. Now, these organizations work in many areas, but the three most common ones are the provision of health and well-being services, as well as the advocacy for equalities and civil rights, and the delivery of advice and support services for various communities. Now, these communities, and especially the beneficiaries, are the biggest group are Black, Asian, and minority ethnic Londoners, followed by organizations that focus on the general public, people with financial needs, women, migrants, deaf and disabled Londoners, as well as young Londoners. Next slide, please. All right, perfect. Great. So one of the questions that we asked these organizations is, if about the percentage of volunteers and staff members that have lived experience. Lived experience means that they belong to one of the beneficiary groups of the works of these organizations. And it seems like more than half of the staff and volunteers have lived experience in most organizations. This has two main consequences. The first one is that it shows that these organizations do have a unique knowledge in terms of what are the needs of communities all across London, and that this knowledge is a big advantage that local and national authorities should absolutely seize upon and help. The second one is that very often this shows that civil society organizations step in to fill in those gaps that they might feel that national and local authorities are not adequately addressing. Next slide, please. We then asked them about if they engaged in civic participation initiatives, and it turns out 2/3 of these organizations that we believe to be representative of organizations across London do in fact have those types of initiatives. However, and next slide, please, when we ask them about engagement in terms of democratic activities, only roughly 1/3 of organizations have engaged, for instance, in activities trying to encourage individuals to take part in elections, or letting people know about how to register to vote or their rights, their voting rights. Next slide, please. We also asked them what they thought would increase the participation, the civic participation of their beneficiaries, who often are some of the most underrepresented and underregistered communities across London. And the two initiatives the two ideas that came out the most were that they really wanted more engagement with local authorities, as well as more opportunities for deliberative democracy. And so these are things that we think should seized upon by local and national authorities in order to increase the participation of some of the most underrepresented communities across London. Next slide, please. We also asked them why they thought that people from their communities had not voted in elections. And a lack of knowledge and lack of trust in the electoral and political system seem to be the main factors for this. And this is something that should be urgently addressed, we believe. Next slide, please. We also asked them what they thought could be possible reforms of the democratic system that could be undertaken in order to increase the political participation of these underregistered and underrepresented communities. And the three most common responses were voting, residence-based voting rights, as well as the introduction of automatic voter registration and granting voting rights to 16 and 17 years olds. Next slide, please. We also asked them, in view of the current government proposals, what they thought about the introduction of mandatory photo IDs for in-person voting. And of the organizations that we surveyed, 63% disagreed with the introduction of such mandatory photo IDs because they thought it would negatively impact the communities that they represent. And when we asked this same question only to organizations that support Black Londoners and other minorities, this disagreement increased to 74%. Next slide, please. Finally, we also wanted to know if a London Democracy Network existed, if they would be willing to join it. A London Democracy Network would share best practices and funding opportunities, as well as collaborate on different democratic initiatives across London, and the majority of them, 61%, agreed with this statement. Now, these are only some of the findings from our research, and I hope you will be able to find more in the report. Now, I will leave it on to Isabel for the presentation of the qualitative findings. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabel McRae, and I'll be talking about our findings from the qualitative side of this project. So first off, I'll just give a little overview of the methods that we used in this research, and then I'll talk about some of the main themes which have come out of it. So the aims of the qualitative part of the London Voices project were to deepen knowledge around civic and democratic engagement in London, focusing particularly on barriers to full participation and how this impacts belonging and trust. Second, to amplify the voices of underregistered and underrepresented London communities and really showcase their lived experiences. And to complement the statistical data that we've just seen in Omar's presentation with in-depth qualitative case studies. Next slide. So who did we speak with? Well, following the survey, we did 21 in-depth follow-up interviews with organizations who directly and indirectly represent underregistered and underrepresented communities here. Next slide. So which communities? Well, private renters, migrants and refugees, Roma, Gypsies and travelers, faith communities, deaf and disabled Londoners, Black and minority ethnic women, young offenders, and young and old Londoners. So a huge diversity. To complement the interviews, we also collaborated and co-designed a peer research with 4 local organizations. So these peer researchers went on to interview and do focus groups with members of their own communities. So through this, we had focus groups with faith and non-faith Londoners, young and Black Londoners, Eastern European and EU migrants, and deaf and disabled Londoners. And so this really allowed us to get a deeper insight into the lived experiences of these communities and reflect that in our report. Next slide. So in this research, what did we ask about in these interviews? First we looked at the biggest challenges and the impacts of major events, COVID-19 being a huge one, but also Black Lives Matter and Brexit. We asked organizations about how they contact, support, and reach out to their beneficiaries. We asked about the forms of civic and democratic engagement they're participating in right now. We also wanted to learn about perceptions on upcoming legislation, such as introduction of voter IDs. And finally, we asked about recommendations to local and national government. Next slide. So through this whole research process, we generated an incredible amount of data and insights from the focus groups and the interviews. And we distilled them down to 20 case studies, which are in our final report. These case studies really sourced from the direct insights and voices of the people we spoke with, and they span from organizational profiles to case studies about particular campaigns, to neighborhood initiatives, as well as community highlights from the focus groups. But across all of these, there were some key themes that really came up. I think the first and most importantly is how barriers to civic and democratic participation are connected to many other structural barriers. They're connected to barriers to housing, to decent employment, to healthcare, language services, food security, accessibility, and many more. And these are highlighted in our report in different ways. We also looked at perceptions of government-led policies and legislation. Particularly in this report, we've highlighted the negative impacts of bills such as the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill, the Election Bill, Section 29 eviction notices, and so you'll find these in our case studies. We also saw how important and absolutely crucial the role of civil society is in local communities and how they really work on the front lines to provide immediate services, information, and support to their communities. We also highlighted innovative and grassroots forms of civic and democratic participation, especially in the realm of fantastic campaigns and different projects these organizations are involved in. And finally, what local authorities, funders, political parties, and the UK government can do to support civic and democratic participation in London. So with that, I'll hand it off to our recommendations with Alex.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Omar and Isabel, for presenting those findings. So the full report, of course, contains much more than this short presentation allows, and we actually have like at least one page, like several recommendations for each of the different stakeholders that we looked at. But in the next 3 slides, I will just briefly present kind of the top line recommendations, and I really encourage you to look at the report in detail, particularly if you're someone from, let's say, the local authority. There are very detailed and practical recommendations for local authorities in the same way they are for civil society organizations, funders, and even political parties. So on the first slide, so we kind of had the different categories of recommendations, and of course some of the recommendations come directly from the people with the lived experiences that participated in the focus groups, interviews, or through other means such as qualitative comments during this in the survey, and other recommendations are also extrapolated from the findings and the analysis that the team has conducted. So for local authorities, the strongest theme that came through this research was the need to recognize civil society as equal local partners in the process, in this journey towards civic and democratic participation, and therefore to strengthen the platforms and create the resources for civil society to connect and plan joint initiatives. So there was a lot of emphasis on collaboration and not duplicating work in the sector. For the Greater London Authority, the top line recommendation is around the role of convening and the role of a facilitator, so facilitating the cooperation between civil society organizations, local authorities, funders, and central government, of course, and the role in advocating for reform in civic and democratic participation, which we have seen briefly on one of Omar's slides, and of course looking at best practices and in its own structures as the authority. The Mayor of London as well has a very important role to facilitate sustainable and inclusive engagement with civil society on participation. What was really encouraged through the research that we conducted was this focus on underrepresented Londoners, and to actually the question was raised on how to actually build on the important role played in advocating for those reforms to actually strengthen participation and to bring together all those key stakeholders in the process on this journey. For central government, of course, there are a lot of policy-related recommendations, but interestingly, what came out a lot from the research was also the focus on actually sharing evidence, on actually knowing, okay, how do we know who is underrepresented or underregistered? And there was a lot of talk about the access to information, so sharing evidence, resources, and data, because data is key in planning effective campaigns in civic and democratic participation, including on voter registration, and sharing those with the key stakeholders. Again, the theme of collaboration, the need for more opportunities to collaborate, and of course a more sustainable funding structure, which links to the next category of recommendations for funders. Many organizations, especially organizations working with people from underrepresented communities, spoke about the need for more core and unrestricted funding, so to make it easier for the people who are already engaged in a lot of community work to actually take this next step and do activities on participation. And we have seen in Omar's slide about this difference, about only about a third do engage in this type of activity, even though over 2/3 actually have activities of community engagement. So this holistic approach to in funding is is instrumental in actually supporting the organizations to have agency in this process and to create their civic and democratic participation activities. The final slide on the recommendations for civil society organizations, again the theme of cooperation and collaboration came up, and the holistic approach to participation. So again, a lot of emphasis on how often organizations, due to funding pressures or other types of pressures, they focus on very specific parts of the journey of participation, whereas what we need to do is to see this journey into perspective. So it's not only about, let's say, a short-term voter registration campaign or one webinar informing people about their political rights. It's about seeing this in the context of collaboration, the journey to participation. The people who will speak after me next, who have the lived experience from the various organizations, will highlight some of those challenges. Finally, we also have recommendations for political parties, because of course we speak about rights to political participation and democratic reform, but also speak about representation. And I think a lot of people on this call, on this Zoom call or on Facebook, would relate to the fact that if you see more people looking and sounding like you in politics and in the structures in general, you'll probably be more likely or more inspired to participate. And this really came out through the research as well. People from many communities seeing that they don't see many people from their community in politics or in various authority structures. So there is a set of recommendations for the need for political parties to support candidates from underrepresented groups, regardless of the political party, and actually advocate for more progressive reforms to encourage democratic participation. So I will stop here. Please do write your questions in the Q&A. I see there are already some comments and questions. We'll come back at the end of this webinar, to the discussion. So really looking forward to your questions. And you have the website on the screen where we find all this detail, because it's very difficult to condense everything in 15 minutes or so. So you have the full report with all the wonderful 20 case studies. You have a summary as well, which I really encourage you to share with people in the sector and your networks. And also you have a briefing paper on the challenges around photo voter ID more specifically as well. So I'll stop sharing now the screen. Do save that website. It's easy to remember. It's londonvoices.co.uk. I'll stop sharing my screen, and now we're moving on to the next part of this launch, which is hearing directly from people who are engaged every day in their work through various projects with the underrepresented Londoners that we speak about. So first of all, I'll introduce them one by one, and they will speak about their lived experience and the experience of the organizations they work with. So first of all, I would like to introduce Shukri Hussain, who is one of the Young Europeans Network volunteers. But Shukri has been doing a lot of work with the Somali community in London, and she actually participated in one of the focus groups with EU Londoners as well. So Shukri has the experience of being in the project as well as volunteering in the sector and being part of a lot of wonderful projects. So Shukri, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. So hi, my name is Shukri. I'm originally a Dutch citizen. Lived in the UK for about 14 years. And in that 14 years, I've only voted once, never for a general election, sadly, but neither even for just actually this year I voted for the first time for the local election in my area, and that was pretty exciting. But I realized that not everyone in my community, in the Dutch Somali, but even in the European Somali community, there isn't, people don't vote as much. And I realized there's a lot of barriers to voting, and the voter ID would make even more barriers in that regard. But mostly, just when I think about voting in the Somali community, it's a bit new to us, considering back home in Somalia, there's only been one actual democratic vote, which was in the 60s. After that, it's been probably, communist and socialist kind of votes, which seem democratic but aren't. So there isn't, and after that, there was a civil war. So after that, there wasn't really a culture of voting anyway, which provides a background, because many of our parents and the people coming from Somali directly had been born in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And there isn't that really the appetite of voting. But when you talk to them about voting, it's kind of binary, because they think, oh, we have to vote for the good guys and not the bad guys. But politics is quite more complicated than that. So you might find that they might just vote for one party because of how they deal with, certain popular things like welfare or immigration, but they won't think about the bigger picture of what they actually feel, because they might be more conservative in their homes, but then not outside. It's very complicated. But I think, there's lots of barriers like language. They might just shy away from the language because, you have to think about what to really tick, who you tick for, and if you don't understand what's on your paper when you go into the booth, then what is the point in their life? That's what they really think. And and I think what would help is having more representation in the Somali community. I mean, yeah, there are some councillors in local councils that have those, but not as many in Parliament. There's only been one MP who's been of Somali descent, and that was Sir Mark Hendricks of Preston. And but then he's not very much a big public, like, front bencher. So it's hard for people to see, oh, that's a Somali politician, then I should probably listen to them or what the party is saying, and then I can probably, make my own decisions. But because also the fact that some of them don't consider, the UK as their final home, they always think to go back. It's just it's just a sort of, should we really invest in this country and make changes in this country if you don't feel home, if we don't feel at home? So the UK has obviously some, some changes to make, like such in this report, and just some more community guidance and community, efforts within, the councillors and, the MPs, so that we can, improve voting rights for all migrants.
Thank you very much, Shukri, for that perspective. So I'm continuing the theme of migration and people of migrant background in London now. And I will invite Krzysia Balinska who's the project manager at Polish Migrants Organized for Change, to hear more about the perspective of Polish communities, in particular Polish women in London. So Krzysia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and thank you for inviting us and including us in the project. And thank you, Shukri, for your accounts as well. I relate to a lot of what you said within the Polish community as well. I am from Pomoc, Polish Migrants Organized for Change, and earlier this year we ran the campaign entitled She Votes, Ona Głosuje, which was designed predominantly but not exclusively with and by Polish women based in the UK to mobilize them to vote in the local elections in the UK in May. I'd like to just share with everybody some key findings from the campaign itself, as well from our focus group research. So first of all, one thing that our community members say to us over and over again is that language remains a key barrier, not just to voting itself, but also to other forms of democratic and civic participation. For example, volunteering, community organizing, attending a demonstration, etc. And so we think that investing in translation and culturally competent materials is absolutely crucial, because this is what makes our communities feel included and more welcome in political campaigns. Second of all, we all need to bring members of our audiences early into the campaign process so that we design it with them rather than for them. Our communities are very often talked about, studied, scrutinized, and scapegoated, and very rarely is our lived experience seen as a source of expertise, creativity, and solutions. And this absolutely goes for development of parties' political programs as well. What we found is that people declared that they are so much more likely to vote if they feel like they have already made a contribution towards creating choices that are listed in the ballot paper. Which brings me automatically to my next point, and it might sound very obvious, but people vote when they know who is running in the elections, and also when they relate and they feel differently about different running candidates. And these relationships are built through engagement. And what I would like to see is more engagement from parties and from political candidates. Polish community in the UK is approximately 800,000 large. It is a community of diverse political leanings. So if anybody who's running for an office, considering running for an office, listening to me now, come talk to us, tell us why you think we should vote for you. And last but not least, what we have also learned is that delegating power to emerging leaders can produce really exciting and unexpected outcomes. We believe in compensating community leaders for their time, and so we offered stipends to train up first-time organizers. This was critical to expand our geographic presence beyond London and in reaching new communities that we wouldn't have otherwise reached. This is everything from me for now. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing more.
Thank you very much, and it's great to have this picture of the work really going through all the journey to participation, from your voter registration campaigns to actually training Polish women to take up some leadership roles in the community. So like really, really important work, and great to hear you speaking about your work. I have to say that Pomoc is also involved in our advisory board as well for the project, which really helps throughout the project sense check some of the recommendations and the findings alongside some other organizations as well. So like I'll speak more about that in a minute, but first of all, I would like to continue this segment of the lived experience speakers in the launch today, and hand over to Yokai Taruvinga, who's a director at Active Horizons, again another organization who was involved in the research and really participated, and one of the case studies is written based on their recommendations. So over to you now for your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you so much to everybody. It's been great listening to all the case studies, which I definitely relate to. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe. and definitely come from a country which has got a fragile political system. And coming to the UK as a refugee, I found myself to be in a position where I had my rights stripped off because I was an asylum seeker. So already automatically, the relationship that I have with the government here, taking all my rights, has already destroyed the trust for me to be involved in any democratic space. So that I found myself meeting a lot of young people in similar circumstances who are asylum seekers, who had no rights to work, had no rights to education. And that's how Active Horizons started. And 15 years down the line is still the same case, which is very unfortunate. A lot of young people that I work with find themselves or believe that they're also equal partners in the society, but because they are from a particular country, particular society, they are discriminated against. Currently, the young people are also talking about how they're still experiencing racism in school and in the community. So it's a very big barrier to actually encourage or give the confidence to a young person to participate. So my call for today to the government, to the key players, to the powers that be, is to create an equal society, a meaningful rather than just words, because we often hear political candidates talking about a fancy, that kind of what do you call it? They promise us things that once they're in power, it's a different ball game. But really, I think it's important that you genuinely create an equal society, engage with the communities, even before or during the campaign, because I think young people are of course, the young people are the future of tomorrow. If we don't show that respect, if we don't show that genuinity, we continuously create a situation where they will end up learning from similar circumstances. So yeah, I would really want to call for the government to put in resources for groups like us, Active Horizons, and other communities here, that we genuinely work with communities, and possibly there will be a better, society in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and yeah, I do relate to that, especially when you have many consultations, and there's a bit of a consultation fatigue, especially now in times of COVID. So it's really, really important that communities do know what is being acted on in terms of the recommendations, of this report today. So thank you so much for this perspective. We have the next speaker, a part of this section of the launch. I would like to invite Kat Wright from ACORN to speak about the experience of private renters, which again is another underrepresented group that we looked at in the London Voices report. So, Kat, over to you.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, I'm Kat. I'm from ACORN. We're a community union, but we focus mostly on housing. A lot of people will know that about 1 in 5 households in the UK rent privately, and a lot of renters feel very disengaged from politics. One of the main reasons that people don't speak up is that they don't feel like people will listen and that it won't make a difference. So having meaningful ways in which renters can influence housing policy and be meaningfully consulted would make a huge difference. So we've got members across London. We organise by knocking on people's doors. We don't believe in things like how hard to reach. We just think that people are putting on the same events again and again and expecting different people to turn up. So we knock on people's doors. We don't tell them what the issues are. We ask them what the issues are and we bring them in. Last night, we actually launched our local group in Tottenham, which is made up of hundreds of people from across Tottenham. And we'll be doing the same in different boroughs across London in the coming few months. We've had really positive experiences with some politicians in the past. For example, some of our members in Bristol sit on the Bristol Homes Board, which makes decisions around housing for the city, and that's been really beneficial for making our members feel represented, and also for really housing policy that reflects what renters actually want being implemented. we find that things like consultations for things like landlord licensing, we're often the only tenants in the room. So I myself have been a renter for the last 20 years, and I've lived in probably at least one house every year. I've experienced evictions, I've experienced black molds, everything you can imagine, and I'm sure so have many of you. But yeah, so we're often the only tenants in the room, and people either don't hear about it, or think that going on their own won't make a difference. So for people to feel confident in having a voice, they need training and support. And this is the long work of community organising, which is what our organisation is built around. We're not about kind of advocating for people, we're about building people up, developing them as leaders, and giving them the skills to be able to fight back of their own accord. We're doing the organising work to build groups and train people to advocate for themselves, which takes a lot of time and resources. We're also training people to know their rights, because a lot of people, things like evictions and other things like that do affect people when they don't always know what their rights are, and they just do what they're told is happening. So we also find that renters are very underrepresented in voter registration numbers because they move so often. It's another deadline and another barrier, like photo ID, would massively disenfranchise them. One survey said that only 4% of people didn't have the right ID already, but 4% of the vote is enough to swing a lot of elections. So yeah, I think we're really excited about some of the findings in the report, and we'll be really looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. There are, millions of tenants across this country, and I think people are ready to get organised and ready to fight back within their communities. So thanks, Alex.
Thank you very much, and yeah, I think it's very important to be that person in the room raising those issues. And I have to say, looking at local authorities and elected representatives, very very few people are in private rents, like I am as well, or are in council housing, for example. So I think it's so important to have people who are in the decision making room also having those lived experiences there. So coming back to the idea of more diverse political representatives as well. We were expecting one other speaker as well, but I don't see them yet. So I will move on to the next section, and then we'll come back to them if they join in the Zoom call. But before we move on to the responses from the GLA and then the funders, I would like to mention the organizations involved in the advisory group, because we had an advisory group that met twice during the project. First, looking at the survey that we did, and second at the recommendations. So it was all part of the co-producing of the recommendations. So we had POMOTs involved, we had ACORN involved, that you already heard from them, but also had the Faith Forum London, and we have a couple of case studies about faith and non-faith communities. Again, very important voices in this debate. We also had the Inclusion London, who really helped us out during the project, and we have this wonderful case study about deaf and disabled communities in London that's so key in terms of the specific recommendations that will enable access of these underrepresented groups to civic and democratic participation. So do check out the report. It's like a 2-page case study. It's very focused on deaf and disabled Londoners, and also had London Youth, and we had some peer researchers as well doing focus groups with young people. Again, we heard a bit about from Shukri, who's of course part of our Young Europeans network, but London Youth worked with so many different youth groups, so it's important that the youth voice is also represented. So this is just a shout out for all the organizations being involved in the advisory group. So I'll now move on to responses from the Greater London Authority first, and I would like to invite Dr. Elizabeth Pope, who can introduce herself and comments from the GLA perspective. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, and to everyone who has spoken already. As a member of the Citizenship and Integration Initiative, it's been a privilege for the GLA and for me personally to be able to be involved in the design and the delivery of this research. We already deliver so much amazing civic and democratic participation at the GLA, and I'm so grateful to see that the London Voter Registration Week partnership is reflected in the report. The biggest non-party political partnership on democratic participation between a regional authority, statutory bodies, or the London authorities, and over 100 civil society organizations. And I heard what all our guests have mentioned about the importance of being seen and being heard, about the importance of co-designing and co-delivering. And I can reassure you that that is at the heart of the work that we try to deliver throughout the year through London Voter Registration Week and our strategic partnerships. But of course, that's not the only work we are doing. And I'm very, very happy to say that over the summer, we've carried out extensive research of various teams across the GLA, part of the Building Stronger Communities recovery mission. So it's very clear to all of us at the GLA that civic and democratic participation need to be at the heart of the emerging social contract. So that means being able to meaningfully work with Londoners, for them, to be able to address some of the barriers that you've already mentioned, and then to be able to create a more fair, a more equitable city in which we can all feel that we can fully participate. So part of the Building Stronger Communities mission, colleagues at the GLA have run and have now launched the first London Civic Strength Index. And I'm going to be very happy to share with Alexander and all of you some of the links to those other reports, because the work that the London Voices research and this ongoing work through the Building Stronger Communities work is very complementary. And we really look forward to working with you on those. So I won't go any further, just I'm going to wait for any questions if there are any, but just to reiterate how happy we were to have been able to be part of this journey with you. And I'll leave you with some final remarks from Debbie Wicks-Bernard, Dr. Debbie Wicks-Bernard, London's Deputy Mayor for Communities and Social Justice. She too reflects on the richness of the perspective presented in the London Voices research and that clear representation and London's experiences, and this will be invaluable in informing our work moving forward. Of course, it is so important to build on this partnership approach. And this work shines through both in the case studies and in the recommendations. And we look forward to working with yourselves and our wider partners across London to action some of these recommendations and support all of London's diverse communities to strengthen their voice and our joint action in our great city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I really like the word action. That's like one big part of the report, including the very detailed recommendations that we have. So I'll move on to the some of the reflections from funders. So first of all, I would like to introduce Geraldine Blake, who's the coordinator of the Citizenship and Integration Initiative. So Geraldine, over to you for your comments and reflections.
Thank you. It has been this has been an amazing piece of work to be part of. This research has really walked the walk because it has been participative itself from beginning to end. Engaging those it aimed to reach in carrying out research themselves, in shaping the recommendations, and that means what we've got is a report that's rooted in both evidence and energy. And is actually a really great read on top of all of that. So the Citizenship and Integration Initiative is a pooled fund. It brings together a number of philanthropic funders led by Trust for London, and we share goals with the GLA around social integration, particularly around participation, around civic and democratic engagement. We believe that all Londoners should be able to participate fully in their communities, and it's not a surprise that it's the groups who are most impacted by poverty and by the pandemic who are also the most marginalised in terms of their democratic participation. Manny Hothi, who is the Chief Executive of Trust for London, said, the future of all of us in London is uncertain as long as London's young people, disabled people, communities of colour and migrant populations have both the highest levels of poverty and the lowest levels of voter registration. I think also it's been really clear during the pandemic, It's become very clear. I mean, the role of community organisations, you know, we all know it in this room, but it's become clear to everybody else what an important role community organisations play. And I think one of the most shocking findings from this research is the fact that, you know, 2/3 of the organisations surveyed said they do civic engagement, they support people to take part in civic engagement, but less than 1/3 do democratic engagement. And that's clearly, you know, there are issues there around electoral law, charity law, and the, you know, the restrictions that we put on funding. I think there is a moment here to invest in community organisations to enable them to do all of the amazing things that they can do in terms of connecting people up, in terms of supporting people to take action together, and to make their voices heard for a better London for all of us. And this report, I think, has set out really, really clearly what the steps are that we need to take to make that happen. We, on behalf of the funders, we really, really welcome the practical recommendations for funders, but also for all of those other audiences, and really look forward to working with you all and with Londoners through the Citizenship and Integration and through the wider London Funders Network, which includes all of London's local authorities, to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Geraldine. So last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Lena Baumgartner, who's the head of the UK Democracy Fund, for her perspective as a funder as well on the project. So Lena, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. It's always great going last because most of your remarks you can kind of cross out because they've been said already, but I'll hopefully be concise. So Lena Baumgartner here. I work for the UK Democracy Fund. We are also a pooled fund, a non-partisan pooled fund, and we're hosted by the Joseph Rowntree Reform Trust. And we funded this project alongside Trust for London on behalf of the Citizenship and Integration Initiative. So I firstly wanted to really congratulate the Young Europeans Network and the team for this very comprehensive and ambitious piece of work. It's been one of those pieces of work which has so many researchers and participants involved in it, where we think from the outset, oh my gosh, this is going to be really difficult to coordinate, but it's been incredibly smooth, incredibly on time. And I think so many different perspectives and so many people with lived experiences have been able to feed in, which has been a real asset, I think, of the entire process. So thank you for all of that. It's a really rich piece of research covering a huge variety of topics relating to civic and democratic participation. And I think we can't possibly do it justice in this hour. And I really hope it'll lead to more future discussions on sort of different aspects of the research. As the UK Democracy Fund obviously focuses on democratic participation and increasing participation of underrepresented groups in elections, I particularly wanted to kind of comment on that core finding that we've heard picked out a few times, that while 60% of civil society organizations surveyed having engaged in civic participation, it's only 1/3 in democratic participation. And I really think this stark difference and growing this number and getting more organizations involved in democratic participation work is sort of a key priority and a key takeaway from this research if we want to engage and equip more Londoners to participate democratically. And I think I just wanted to quickly put it in a wider context, because I think this is not just a London problem. At the Democracy Fund, we always cite sort of this one stat that in 2019, at the last general election, 9.4 million people in Great Britain were not on the electoral registers. That's 17% of the electorate. It's a huge number, and that number has been really high for a number of years. And in London, that's very much reflected. The voter registration rate is among the lowest of the UK's nations and regions. And that obviously low registration translates also in lower turnout that we would like. And I think this is really important because as we know, and as people in this room know, people missing from the electoral registers are not spread evenly across the population. They're by and large younger, they're born overseas, they're people from ethnic minority communities, they're renters or people that live more precariously. And those voices are missing, and that translates into people that are more easily ignored. Politicians and government are less responsive for those people that do not vote. And so it creates political inequality and voicelessness, which obviously this London Voices research really kind of, it resonates with that. And I think what can we do about this? I would really really urge you all to look at the recommendations. They're very detailed. There's a whole range of them, and too many to kind of comment on now. But I think there are recommendations, important ones around electoral reform, for example, to make voter registration automatic, to remove this huge systemic barrier for many people. The research also points to the need to be really clear that non-partisan voter registration and get out the vote work are legitimate activities for civil society to engage in. And there's also the case made to funders, to statutory bodies, that this work needs to be sufficiently funded to be included in activities. And I think all of these are really important, but I want to end, I suppose, on a bit of an appeal to our sort of collective responsibility, I think, as well. So to address this democratic deficit in London, I think that we, and by we, I mean sort of the civil society organizations that are already engaging in this work, funders engaging in it, but also statutory bodies, I think we need to collectively work on growing this number. And I think the aim should be an ecosystem where grassroots organizations and civil society working with underrepresented groups, for example, young Londoners or renters, should routinely engage in democratic engagement activities, such as voter registration. It should be part and parcel of the work. And I think to achieve this, we need to all do much more to encourage and equip greater parts of civil society to engage with this work, whether that's through kind of demystifying this work, sharing resources, connecting organizations via platforms, and of course, funding it sufficiently. And I think in the light of the structural inequalities highlighted by the pandemic, and how this sort of really directly correlates to political inequality as well, I really think this can't wait. And for London's voices to be heard, we need to ensure greater democratic participation of all parts of London's rich and diverse community. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena, and thank you everyone for your contributions. I do realize we're 5 minutes to 2, but with all the webinars trying to include many perspectives as possible, like we'll always run out of time. But I was really, really glad to hear from such a diverse range of speakers, and I hope you did enjoy this too. However, I will take a couple of questions, because I think I'll just put 2 questions out there. I'll change from the speaker view to see everyone on the screen. So we have a few more colleagues from the research team as well, Stephanie and Raluca on the screen as well. So we had 2 questions I want to pick up on. One is about the role of trust. So Christine asks us, how is the role of trust in public authorities related to democratic participation in your view? So perhaps from the research team, but as well as people with lived experience in London, like how do you see this relationship between public authorities, trust and democratic participation? And we also had a couple of questions about the elections bill. So like how do you see the elections bill impacting on the kind of reforms and challenges that we want to achieve here as a group? A tricky question, I have to say, so I'm not sure who wants to comment on that one, but maybe let's start with trust. But I'll just speak on a few people just to get a range of perspectives. So perhaps someone from the research team, and then someone from the lived experience speaker, so we can have a range of perspectives. I'm not sure who wants, if maybe Stephanie or Raluca want to pick up on this, because you haven't spoken already. No?
I can go. I mean, it's a good question, and it's one that I was hoping to get more time to think about. But it was mentioned, especially when we were talking about people from the Windrush generation and the kind of solutions that you would want to offer them, and the kind of distrust that is already present between them and the Home Office, for example, and how you can work around that kind of thing. So for me, it's kind of, how do you expect people who you've already clearly wronged in so many ways to feel a part of this country and to be ready to engage in terms of voting and that kind of thing? And how do you repair that lack of trust? And I don't have answers for that, but I think it's a question that we need to spend a lot of time thinking about. I think there needs to be an overt expression of will on the part of local governments and the wider UK government to show that indeed there is like a sense in which they feel like there's something to be repaired, because I think that show is necessary. That show of willingness is necessary to even inspire any willingness to engage. I think there's something quite broken among many communities in terms of the link between them and the authorities, whether it's local or wider governmental, and that broken link needs to be recognized and attended to, because otherwise people will not feel ready to engage. So I'm not sure, but yeah, that's my feeling at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for your perspective, Stephanie. I'm sure, like many of us, do relate to that. Anyone wants to take out the elections bill question? I'm not sure. Maybe Shukri or Krishisha, you're working on this as well, on the voting rights campaign. So I'm not sure if either of you wants to engage with that question in particular, or anyone else. I just opened the debate. Great,
Yes.
go on.
Yeah. So yeah, so both of them are kind of related to some kind of the same questions, aren't they? What is the elections bill doing for the need to all residents? So in fact, I think the elections bill is kind of harming the encouragement for people to vote, having the right to vote, because they are restricting the vote for those EU citizens who came after January, and that is probably a large amount, because we can't put it into numbers just yet. I think there might be a few statistics, but there's quite a few thousands already come after, and they've already had the right to register to vote and not the actual vote. Actually vote is a bit jarring, because I mean, why would you not let them vote when you just let them register vote? And I think the only solution would be to just let them vote by residents. In Yen is doing the resident based voting right, our home, our vote campaign, and we just campaigning for resident based voting for all migrants in England and in Northern Ireland. So I think that would be the main solution for for young people to have a say in their local community. But with barriers for young people, well, voter ID is the main one, isn't it? Because not every young person has a driver's license or a passport, especially if they don't need to move across the UK. You don't need one to move across the UK or Ireland. So why would you really need to, unless you're traveling outside of Britain or Northern Ireland or Ireland even? So I mean, that is gonna stop people from voting, even if the time we can still vote until 10 o'clock at night. But that's still gonna that's still an extra burden, and hopefully by voting against this in Parliament, we can prevent this. But we'll see.
Thank you very much, Shukriya. And there are a lot of organizations working on so many different aspects of the bill, so it will be an interesting time in Parliament to follow the debate. I will take, because I'm aware we're out of time, I'll take one last question, because I think, Jackie raised their hand in there, so I'm trying to get someone to get a live question as well to end on a live question, and then we can wrap up the webinar. So let me see if this works. Can you hear us, Jackie?
Yes, thanks very much. It was just something that went through my mind as the last speakers. Do you think that it would, because I was thinking earlier, we have to do more, we have community groups, but we tend to focus on specific issues, mainly about improving housing, giving people more security in their homes, and looking as well at things like tax reform. And so I'm thinking, well, we really, really need to do much more in terms of voter participation, in terms of, because most of our, the people we work with are renting, getting people to register to vote. We always try, but we need to do more. But I'm just thinking, would people be more inclined to participate if we had a different voting system? Because we could work 100% of our time increasing voter registration in our own borough, which is in Brent in West London. But actually it wouldn't make any difference, because both the MPs and the councillors have such a big majority. They don't actually need any more votes to know that they're going to continue in power, subject to some major thing. So, but if there was a proportional representation, do you think that would make it easier for us to sell the argument about the importance of voting for people who don't at the moment?
Thank you very much for that question, Jackie. And yeah, I do get this quite a lot of the time, saying like, why should I vote if it doesn't make a difference locally? So then I have to come up with a different argument for why voting is important, and can be challenging for us, like people like in the activist sector as well. Raluca, you had your hand up. Was it like a separate point from last time, or would you like to comment on this one as well?
No, I just wanted to build on Stephanie's point referring trust and belonging, and I just wanted to add 3 key points, I think. For me, what was very important in extracting from interviews with organizations and peer research, it was about the fact that a lot of organizations felt that the government projects a polarizing communication, a polarizing language, pretty much getting publics against each other. And I think this is exactly what a lot of organizations have mentioned, the fact that they can bring together a counter narrative to what the government is doing. So maybe in terms of communication, something can be done through that kind of strength in platforms and networks and partnerships. And the second point that I wanted to make regarding to Stephanie's point, trust and belonging, if more local and grassroots collaborations between organizations and local authorities can actually make newcomers and feel more welcomed and more included in the local community. So I think that these two, I mean, definitely there are very many practical recommendations which have been highlighted by the report, but I really wanted to stress out these 2 points that I think link together many levels of our society. Thank you.
Thank you, Raluca. Very important points. Anyone wants to comment on the question about, yeah, Omar, go on.
Absolutely. No, this is a very good point. And indeed, there have been movement advocating for a change of the electoral system, but that's a broader issue that it's more difficult for us to act upon in the immediate term, right? Now, one thing that happens very often with majoritarian systems, such as the one in the UK, is that this idea that because there is already a big majority in a constituency, you won't be able to make any meaningful change, even if you get some people to register to vote. It's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So you basically believe that there's going to be you're not going to make any change, and therefore the change doesn't happen because many people believe the same thing. So maybe that big majority exists, but there is a hidden pool of people who would be willing to vote if they thought that their vote would make a difference. So what we can do in the meanwhile is try to encourage people to vote, get more people to register if possible, and then hopefully these big gaps will decrease in a way that effectively people will stop thinking get their seats, especially in the UK, their seats are actually safe seats, and maybe start seeing them more as competitive ones where their vote matters. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Maro. I'll add one very final point, which kind of brings back the title of the journey to participation. I think when we speak about democratic participation, speak about the whole journey. It's not only about voting in an election. Many Londoners can't vote in a general election unless they're like British, Irish, or from a Commonwealth country. But a lot of us can participate in other ways, such as knowing how to write to our local council or participating in other kind of local activities encouraged by local authorities. So I hope this report also puts the democratic participation into the perspective of this journey about Pomos's work, for example, encouraging leaders from Polish migrant backgrounds, for instance, or like many of your work here in this group. So yeah, any final comments? Otherwise I will, yeah, because we're like 10 minutes over. This is a topic we can debate for a very long time. So this brings me to the next steps. First of all, thank you everyone for all the work on this project and the discussion today as well. You have the London Voices website on the chat where you can find the full report, the briefing paper, and the voter ID. Photo voter ID briefing as well as some nice quotes and a nice video as well, which you can share with your friends and networks. It's like a YouTube link as well that you can share. And in terms of the next steps, because as we have realized today, there are a lot of different conversations in this broad project about the journey to participation. So what the team is looking now at the moment is from the new year, from 2022, how we develop those conversations more specifically for various groups involved. So, for example, can we have a discussion with migrant Londoners, for instance, speaking about the specific recommendations and how to make some of those recommendations a reality with the different stakeholders involved? Or can we have a more in-depth discussion about the barriers and challenges to deaf and disabled Londoners, for instance, and how the report can help address those challenges? So this is all that we're looking now, so it's work in progress. But if anyone wants to be involved, you have all the contact details on the website, so let's stay in touch, and we always welcome more people being involved in fulfilling this journey to participation for all Londoners, no matter their nationality, background, or other type of arbitrary often status. So yeah, thank you everyone again. And have a good rest of the day. The webinar will be available on the Facebook page. It will stay there if you want to rewatch or share. And I will send a follow-up email as well at some point tomorrow with the recording and some of the other materials. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening. Bye.